Hey everyone, let's get started. Thanks so much for coming. It's absolutely great to see such a full room. Probably relates to the speaker and the topic rather than any particular love of this faculty building. So I'll just dive straight in. We're really delighted to have Dr. Jalal come to speak to us today. She is based in Cambridge. She is a fellow and a senior college lecturer in politics and international relations at Murray Edwards College. Although she's now in politics and international relations, she started her educational trajectory in Persian, doing a BA in Persian at Oxford. Sorry. It's okay, we're all really very similar. And then went on to do a master's in development studies at SOAS, where she also went on to complete a PhD, which means we both did our PhDs in the same institution because I did my PhD at SOAS. So all sorts of interesting connections. She's been at Murray Edwards since 2007. She's active in the areas of Persian studies. She works as a trustee and outreach director of the British Institute for Persian Studies. But she's also someone who publishes widely in political science and international relations. Her book was published in 2011, Iran's Struggle for Economic Independence, Reform and Counter-Reform in the Post-Revolutionary Era. And she's going to talk to us today about someone who I've always wanted to know more about, Jalal Al-e Ahmad. So this is going to be an exciting talk. And she's going to be looking at the transnational connections of Iranian revolutionary thought, both, I think, in the 20th century, but perhaps also coming up to the present and the echoes. Touch on that.
I'll ask that everyone would be interested in hearing about Iran today, so I'll try my best.
Anyway, we welcome you very warmly, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. And I hope someone will tell me to shut up if I talk for too long. So
I'll start looking dubious.
Yeah. Thank you. It's really nice to be invited to this faculty and to have this audience, which it's like, I know some of you in the audience, but it's also a new audience for me. So when we've got these silos of being in polis or being in AIMS or being in history, we don't always see each other. So it's nice to have this opportunity to speak to you all. And thank you, Amira, for the generous introduction. So I'll be talking about Jalal Al-e Ahmad, but not exclusively, because the whole idea is that I want to look at connections and not think about Iran as exceptional or Iran on its own, but rather to think about Iran within the world. So that's hence the transnational connections. This talk is very helpful to me as well, because I'm in the process of trying to revise a paper. And so I'm hoping to try out this paper and then see what you all say, and then it will help me with my revisions. The name of the paper is just a slight variation of the name of the title of this talk. And it's at the moment got the title Reading Gandhi, Fanon and Gramsci Through Iranian Eyes, Tracing Transnational Connections. And it's a piece that I've co-authored with a former student of mine called Rosa Rahimi. And in the paper, in this presentation, I'm looking at thinking about how Iranian revolutionary thought was shaped by that global context, because we so often people work on Iran within the field of Iranian studies, and then people who might work in international political thought or international relations don't always refer to Iran as a case study that is of any interest to them. And then the Iranian studies people aren't necessarily always, not that they never do, but often aren't as talking in ways that it's heard by that broader sort of audience. So I'm trying to sort of map, that's why there was a map on the cover sheet, map those internationalisms of 20th century revolutionary and anti-colonial intellectual output. And I picked Gandhi, Fanon and Gramsci, partly because I think they're all really interesting thinkers, also because Jalal Al-e Ahmad liked all of those thinkers, so we have proof that he had read their work and he talks about them, and that's what I'll be going through today and seeing the sorts of similarities. And it makes it quite interesting because we don't always, or we very rarely sort of put Gandhi and Fanon together in the sense of trying to look at their connections. People think of Fanon as being all about needing to resort to violence to overthrow the colonial oppressor, And Gandhi was very not in favour of using violence to achieve such goals. And so it's kind of interesting to see the way that when we look at them both through how Jalal Ahmad was reading Gandhi, it's really interesting to see actually that we start to see the similarities. So not only do we get to see that Iranians in the 60s and 70s were aware of writings from around the world and interested in incorporating those ideas into their own thinking. But when we recognize the ways in which they were doing that, we can also see the connections between all of those other thinkers as well. So we learn more about Iran, and then we also learn more about everyone else as well, I think, through putting them together. Amira said she knows a little bit about or has heard of Jalal Ahmad and is interested in learning more, but I didn't want to assume that everyone in the audience would actually know who is this guy. So Jalal Al-e Ahmad lived in those years from 23 to 1969. He's most famous for a book that he published in 1962 called Gharb Zadegi. Gharb means west. You might all know this actually in this setting. And Zadegi would be like to be hit. If you're hit by something, that would be your Zadegi. So it's sort of referred to as, sometimes it's translated to Westoxication. It means literally being struck down by the West. And it's like as if you've been struck down by flu or COVID. Yeah, so you've been hit by COVID, you've been hit by the West. The book is really worried about the ways in which Iranian society and Iranian intellectuals in particular have become really just wanting to emulate the West and looking at associating Westernization with development and modernization and all things positive, and that Jalal Ahmad thinks that this makes them unable to think really in a critical way about what really might be in the interests of Iranians and what might help make Iran a better place for the people living in that territory to be experiencing. And he associates Westernization with the ways in which it's imposing a form of colonial modernity, which he has problems with. It's interesting because while Gharb Zadegi is critical of the steps towards Westernization that are taking place under Mohammad Reza Shah in Iran, so this is the pre-revolutionary period under the Shah. The book was actually initially commissioned by the government. So the Ministry of Education asked him to write a report, but then once they saw what he wrote, they banned it. So that he didn't write what they were hoping that he would write. He's less known for this, but he also wrote another book. Well, he wrote other things as well, but the two texts that we look at in this paper are then the other one is called the Dar Khedmat Khianat Roshan Fekran, which translates to On the Service and Treason of the Intellectuals. And that was written as sort of short little pieces, essays, over the period between 1963 and 1968. And it all got published together in two volumes, but sort of one big book after his death, so posthumously in 1978. And so these are the two spaces where we can see discussion of and reference to Gandhi, Fanon and Gramsci. So there's a picture of Jalal Ahmad, and we can see all of these books are translated into Persian. This is the Dar Khedmat Khianat Roshan Fekran, and this is a copy of Gharb Zadegi, and these are translations into Persian of, well, this is a sort of biography of Gandhi, and then we've got the prison notebooks, Daftarhay Zendan, is the Gramsci prison notebooks. So Gandhi from India, Gramsci from Italy in the 1930s, Gandhi earlier in the century and beyond. And then the Wretched of the Earth by Fanon is over there on the far side. And so I found it interesting also, it's quite neat that you get a thinker from Europe, a thinker from India, and a thinker from Africa, all in dialogue really with Jalal Ahmad in Iran, in sort of the middle of all of that. So those are the texts, those are the texts of the other authors that we sort of put into conversation with Jalal Ahmad are Gandhi's Hind Swaraj, the prison notebooks by Gramsci, and then the Wretched of the Earth by Fanon. And in terms of thinking of the web and the ways that there are connections, it would be really messy if I were to present to you all of the connections between all the four authors sort of all the way through this presentation. I think I would just get in a big muddle. So I've sort of divided it into thinking about what primarily is the commonality in the discussion between Jalal Ahmad and Gandhi, and that would be a critique of colonial modernity. And where is there more commonality with Fanon, and that's in the critique of violence. And then when we come to Gramsci, there's really the focus on thinking about the role of the intellectual, of what is an intellectual, and what can an intellectual do within a society if we want to challenge and overturn that colonial modernity and the colonial violence. But really, they're all talking about all of those things. So they're all sort of thinking about which actors could be involved in overturning the things that we don't like about our society, and they're all touching on violence. But it's just in terms of just to break it down, I focused on Fanon in relation to violence and Gandhi in relation to colonial modernity. And what I see when I look through all of these texts and read them sort of through Gandhi's, through Jalal Ahmad's, through Jalal Ahmad's eyes, is that we sort of start to see that what they're doing is they're all imagining or trying to imagine a different kind of a world in which freedom from oppression and attainment of one's humanity to be treated as human beings, to have dignity, and to not be viewing yourself or to be viewed by others as inferior in any way, and how that could all be achieved. So they are each writing, you know, Gandhi's obviously writing about India and speaking to the context of British colonialism, but the vision for a future is one that's to reject the sort of the model of the Western nation state and capitalism, and they sort of are all trying to imagine something new. Sadly, none of their imaginings have were subsequently realised, nor are they yet. And we could question how far these sorts of imaginings are present in the minds of protesters in Iran today. I guess if we wanted to try to make those connections, how well they've survived in contexts of hardship and sanctions and all of this today. So we'll start with Gandhi, and then we'll move through each of the three writers in turn, and just each one just looking at, so what does Jalal Ahmad say? I don't know that many people are aware. I mean, I was quite excited when I found it. There's a book that was published in 1956, so quite a way before Arbzadegi was published, in which the book was called Mardane Khod Sakhte, so self-made men, and in it there is a chapter also written by the Shah, who is admiring his father. So it's an official sanctioned publication, and it was a very range of authors, and each one wrote a chapter on a person that they admired. And the person that Jalal Ahmad picked to write his chapter about was Gandhi. And within the chapter, Jalal Ahmad sort of provides just a little bit like a biography of Gandhi's life. He explains why he's chosen to write about him. He says that he admires Gandhi for his honesty, his pacifism, his asceticism, his tolerance for others, his commitment to values of justice and fairness. And he explains to his Iranian Persephone reader about what are the principles of passive resistance and truth force that Gandhi is exploring in Hind Swaraj. And what's really striking is when you realize that Jalal Ahmad had read Gandhi, as you then go back and read Arbzadegi, you realize, well, the whole thing of Arbzadegi being like that it's a disease. I speak of Arbzadegi as I would speak of having cholera, he writes within Arbzadegi. It's how similar that is to the way, like the number of times that Gandhi speaks of the disease of Western civilization. He says that Indian society is beset by the disease of civilization, and that's just one quote, but there are many places through Hind Swaraj where that language of, that sort of language of disease, of illness, and of Iranians and Indians being contaminated, and sort of partly also they both speak about how they perceive a sense of responsibility on the part of Iranians and Indians of sort of allowing themselves to be infected with this being enamored for the West. They've sort of allowed it to thrive within their societies. So that was also another interesting similarity. And they see that, well, partly it's sort of not people's fault that they've become subject to this disease and started to think that the West is better. The material world in which they're existing is one with all of this modern machinery and technological advancement, which is imported into these countries from the West. And they both talk about machinery and technology as artificial and as being responsible for kind of blinding Iranians and Indians, respectively, to their subjection to this terrible disease. Gandhi comments, it's machinery that has impoverished India. Interestingly, on Gandhi, people often think, oh, wow, he hated all machinery and just wanted us to only walk where we could, but with our own 2 feet, and that people like to portray it as, I don't know, a slightly irrational sort of desire. But he does write about the problems with all of the money being spent on the railway network across India that's only there to serve the imperial power's interests. And he says, well, all that money, we could have spent it on trying to prevent famine. So it's because he sees the investment into material infrastructure as sort of preventing or minimizing the amount that could be spent on other things that he really takes issue. So it's kind of not just for the sake of it that he's opposed to machinery. Jalal Ahmad says some similar things. He talks about humanity being, I did a typo, trampled. That should be trampled by the machine. And so again, I just thought it was really interesting to see that similarity between the two. But whereas Gandhi is a little bit more extreme in envisaging a world where we might just really go back to basics and live in a more simple life, Jalal Ahmad is more interested in Iranians taking control of the machine for themselves. He says, in order to gain control over the machine, it is necessary to build it oneself. While Gandhi is kind of just like, let's just get rid of the machine and live in tiny village communities with direct participatory democracy or direct democracy. Both of them are at times, or have at times in analyses of their writings, been accused of being anti-modern, and that they sort of want to step back into the past. And much more usually more recent scholarship tends to reject those claims. And really, we can see that they're not rejecting modernity; they're just imagining a different kind of modernity. For Gandhi, that future, that imagined future world that he would like to construct, is one that places human beings at the center of economic and political life, rather than having them sort of placed as or used as tools to achieve economic goals, but to really put people first. So there's a real thread of preoccupation with advancing and protecting humanity and dignity, rather than say profits and corporate interests first. So that there's a desire to construct a new world. It really is quite modern. Jalal Ahmad sees himself, and Gramsci is where this quote comes from, as an Easterner with a foot in tradition, but keen to jump into the future. So he's sort of, there's a modernity in it that he's trying to think of a different way to combine some aspects of what they might, I don't know, nostalgia for the past, or thinking about quote unquote like Iranian values, but also forging that in a way that's different, that's something that's new, that will allow Iran to maintain its independence and protect itself from Western meddling or interference from other powers or exploitation economically. So they've basically, that's my message. They both want to build a new world, and we'll sort of see that with each of the thinkers, really. And I'm just interested to hear what everyone thinks about this idea of looking into depth into those connections. So we'll turn to Fanon. While with Gandhi, we know definitively Jalal Al-e Ahmad read Gandhi, he wrote about Gandhi, we know when. The book was published in 1956. When it comes to Fanon, there's been a lot of different sorts of claims made about who first translated Fanon into Persian, who was the first person to know Fanon. Did Fanon and Jalal Al-e Ahmad know each other? They probably didn't, but at some point he did read some Fanon. He didn't translate it himself. So he was aware of Fanon. And then Hamid Dabashi, in his book about Jalal Ahmad, also just comments that even if they didn't sort of know each other or read each other, there's a very we can see a lot of echoes between just what they were doing. Although I do think that Jalal Ahmad had read Fanon. I don't know whether Fanon had read any Jalal Ahmad, but that they were kindred souls, really, that they had very similar preoccupations. And what we do know is that by the time Dar Khedmat was written, so the later publication, there are quite lengthy quotations throughout the text of Wretched of the Earth. And he also refers to Sartre's introduction to Wretched of the Earth, and he refers to other contemporary writers like Aimé Césaire and his discourse on colonialism. And the image there is just another picture of a Persian translation of Wretched of the Earth, as if that one of the pages from the inside of the book. So Fanon is known for his critique of colonial violence, and Jalal Ahmad is really interested to explore his writings about colonial violence and the being put at the butt of a rifle when you're experiencing colonial settler occupation. And he, I guess quite bravely for the time within the Iranian context, is making that connections between the ways in which military force in settler colonial societies treats the colonized peoples, and the way that Savak, the secret police in Iran under the Shah that were built up after the 1953 coup, were exerting violence on Iranian society, and the fear that engenders amongst the population. So he invokes Fanon in order to sort of discuss his context and his critique of the police in Iran. He quotes Fanon and says that the presence of the policeman and the soldier in the lives of colonized people is where they're just using the language of pure force. So if they only speak this language, you can only speak that language back to them. And he finds it useful to employ Fanon's anti-colonial discourse. Now, Iran is not a colony. Ahmad knows that. Iran was never directly colonized by any foreign power, but it was subject to a lot of interference and competition between Britain and Russia, and then increasingly close ties with the United States in the period that these texts were written. So he finds the colonial framework to be very useful to critique the ills of Pahlavi society and the disease of Arab-Zadigi in his context. I guess just some ways to see that they also are making a critique of capitalism. So there's the relationship, I guess capitalism comes into the idea with the Gandhi critique of machines. This is all the machines and technologies that are used for capitalistic purposes. And then you see that becoming really clear and apparent, the discussion of the critique of capitalism when Jalal Ahmad is engaging with Fanon. So Jalal Ahmad says that for me, West and East do not have a political meaning, and nor do they have a geographical meaning. Instead, they're two economic concepts. So he's sort of doing what we might term dependency theory, where he is understanding it's a development studies sort of term, but sort of understanding that they're not cultural or civilizational entities, but that it's determined by who is richer and who is poorer, and that there are the rich countries on one side and they tend to be in the global north, and then there are the poor countries on the other side in the global south. And that's quite similar to when we see Fanon describing that very material inequality between settlers in a settler colonial society and colonized peoples. So Fanon writes in Wretched of the Earth, the settler's town is a well-fed town, an easygoing town. Its belly is always full of good things. So we have a rich community. And the native town is a hungry town, starved of bread, of meat, of shoes, of coal, of light. So when Jalal Ahmad is referring to Fanon, quoting Fanon's comments in this way, we can see that he's critiquing the Pahlavi regime in Iran as what we could sort of term like an internal colonizer. So that they're doing this to Iranian society. So there is an elite of 1,000 families around the Shah who are well fed. They're having parties at Persepolis. I don't know if anyone knows about the 1971 celebrations of 2,500 years of continuous monarchy celebrated by the Shah. All of this extravagance and opulence, and then wanting that to be the image that Iran can portray to other visiting dignitaries and on the international stage, but that actually behind the nice tree-lined boulevards in Tehran that people are shown, there's a really, really deep inequality and people hungry and neglected by the state. So it's quite interesting that he's basically, I feel like he's kind of saying that there's an internal colonialism going on. There may well still be an internal colonialism going on in Iran. So there's the concern that all of this, the machines, the violence, the economic inequalities are making it difficult for people to be real humans. Fanon says that colonialism dehumanizes the native. Jalal Ahmad says that it's robbing people of their identity. And he again brings in quotes from Fanon and M.A. Sauveur to really back up and explore those ideals. So we finally turn to Gramsci. I don't know. I don't know. I hope everyone knows that Gramsci was an Italian writer who was imprisoned by Mussolini and under fascism, and wrote a series of essays that were smuggled out of prison and turned into this very big chunky notebook, right? So Gramsci's interesting because the other two non-Iranian thinkers are writing in a colonial context and they are writing against colonialism. And we might go, well, he's just an Italian, he's in Europe. So that's not really about how does this fit in? But a lot of sort of decolonial and post-colonial scholars are increasingly really interested in Gramsci's writing. He's from the south of Italy. He's critiquing fascism, and there's sort of a lot of import of his ideas that can be applied to a colonial context. So even though he's not writing in a colony as such, he's sort of writing from the perspective of the dispossessed and the neglected sections of the society under unaccountable rule. So when he's having drawn on Gandhi and Fanon to sort of explain what he perceives to be the problem, he refers to Gramsci to think what can be the solution. So we need people to do something to bring about some change, to overcome this state of internal colonialism. And maybe intellectuals, and I guess he's an intellectual, or he would consider himself an intellectual. So he's thinking, yeah, we need intellectuals can do something, but who is an intellectual? And who can do that intellectual work within Iranian society? And would it be the same kind of person that Gramsci identifies in his context? I mean, the answer is no, he thinks it's a bit different. He's really interested in Gramsci's discussions of the role of intellectuals. There's huge sections of the prison notebooks that are just in Dar Khedmat as full translations rather than just little individual quotes. And well, let's see what some of them are. Yeah, so he thinks intellectuals can be the path. He sees the potential for sort of anyone to be an intellectual. Gramsci says, really, anyone has the capacity to think. You don't need to be in a university or in an ivory tower. He writes about how anyone doing any kind of physical activity is still has a brain, still is engaging their brain, still is able to think critically about what they're doing. For Jalal Ahmad, he's worried that a lot of the middle class intellectuals, I guess his sort of peers, that he's critiquing in Gramsci, he thinks they're all a bit Arabs out there. They're all a bit Western struck, so that they're only referring to Western political thought. They're trying to pursue economic policies that really are just capitalist. He thinks they're just imitating. And so he thinks, well, where could we find in Iran some more organic, authentic intellectuals? And partly he thinks that maybe in rural areas, people who are less affected by these developments of Westernization, that might be one place. And then what's really interesting about Jalal Ahmad is the way that he thinks about the role of the ulama, so the religious elites, and what that might be. The thing is, he also just dies too soon, so we don't get to see him actually develop his thinking, and his thoughts are a little bit, I don't know, his books aren't as well written as the other books I'm referring to, because he's just writing in a mad rush with passion, and then he's not maybe reflecting and editing, and we don't get to see where he would take those thoughts. On the one hand, he's really cross with the ulama for being, he sort of thinks they're backwards, stuck in traditions. So he's a bit contradictory, really, if he's worried about the modernization, but then also the people who are a bit backwards. He also holds them a little bit responsible for allowing Westernization and Arab Zadigi to take hold in Iran. But at the same time, he sees that maybe that is a space where resistance could take place. They're still very active and important, especially in rural communities in Iran. And also, it's just, if you think in 1963, it's Khomeini who's the one who's speaking out against the Shah, Khomeini who's getting exiled. You're already starting to see that that's the space where people can be critiquing the Pahlavi regime. So he's a little bit unsure, like who is going to do this, but he's using Gramsci and thinking about what might be different about Iran in order to think these questions through. But whereas Gramsci is like, no, clergy need to, that's not going to be our solution, Jalal Ahmad is a little bit more open-minded about that. I guess I just don't want to run over time. But so I think this slide might just waffle on a bit more about what I've just said. Yeah, I've already covered. Yeah, don't only think that intellectuals can do intellectualism. Each can. I think that slide was supposed to go before the other one. I apologise. Oh, I do. Oh, I'm just rushing for no reason. Anyway, I think I'm going to end early because I was sped through. But yeah, so that should have gone before the other one, basically. So I've sort of talked through that with other slides. That's a picture of Gramsci in the background, as it was for, hopefully that was evident first time on. Okay, and then, yes, this is my last slide, but I guess this is where, if I do have more time, I can talk then about what I mentioned in the abstract, was then just thinking about Iran today and so on. But just to sum up, while there has been a lot of literature in Iranian studies making the sort of obvious point that these Iranian revolutionary thinkers were not just nativists, they weren't only thinking about Iran, and they were interested in global connections. People often just say that without then showing the real details of how global, like international political thought is being engaged with. So one thing I was trying to do, or that we are trying to do with the paper, is to really be specific and show the evidence of how they're engaging. And it's also interesting to see the commonalities between the other three thinkers as well. And then, if we notice that they're all seeking to confront these unjust systems of rule in their locality, but building this new world, that a sense of humanity, dignity, freedom is really key to all of these thinkers. I find it interesting to reflect on the ways that those revolutionary ideas got used as we got closer to 1979 and then beyond 1979, and being used by the Islamic Republic. They love this sort of discourse of Arab Zadigi, but they haven't built the world Jalal Ahmad was hoping for. So it becomes a sort of well, they've taken some ideas and then they've used it within as a way of legitimizing and supporting their own ideas. And if if we accept the sort of this, well, my interpretation that Jalal Ahmad is perceiving the Pahlavi regime as a kind of an internal colonizer, and he's critiquing the capitalistic structures that are part of that society. And we think of that critique being really powerful and important within the 1979 revolution. Then we can also see, even though notions of anti-imperialism are woven into the Iranian constitution and all of the policies that would be adopted over time by that regime, we can also see the Islamic Republic as vulnerable to being critiqued in all of the same ways. I mean, maybe not the Arab Zadigi, I guess, because they're very anti-Westernization. Maybe they've been struck by Islamic Republic, the sort of politicization of Islam and the corruption of the religion. Maybe that's what's happened. But there is violence. There is colonial violence because Iran has so many varied ethnic communities who experience violence and unequal access to material resources relative to other populations in the country. And there's inequality and corruption, and a lot of these problems sadly persist. And I don't know, obviously everyone who's in Iran today has the potential to be an intellectual. If we take this Gramscian understanding, everyone has thoughts, they all know what they're living through, and they know what ideas they might have about the future. But I suppose the disappointing outcomes of the last revolution that Iran had might make one a little bit cautious about any unintended consequences or sort of what trajectory any future developments within Iran might have, plus all of the complications of external actors being involved, and the delight of sort of Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, who's been in Virginia, Maryland, wherever he's been since for the last nearly 50 years. So like all of that, what's that going to lead to? And I don't know. And what sorts of, it'd be interesting to think like what kinds of global connections are there, and with people having ideas and thoughts about a future Iran now, what are the transnational webs that are being built now? But I can't talk about that now, but it's interesting to think about. And yeah, I'll stop there. I don't know if I'm ready, but it allows time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for a really interesting and stimulating talk. We've got packed rooms, so I'm sure you will have lots of questions.
Pen to write them down.
Yeah, while everybody's sort of formulating their thoughts, I just like to